The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. Forward, in which the author of this singular work tells the reader how he was led to become certain that the opera ghost really existed. The ghost in the Paris opera existed. He was not, as was long believed, a delusion of the singers, a superstition of the managers, or a ludicrous fantasy concocted by the overheated brains of the dancers in the corps de ballet, their mothers, the ushers, the cloakroom attendants, and the concierge. Yes, he existed in flesh and blood, even though he gave himself every appearance of a real ghost, a true phantom. When I first began going through the archives of the National Academy of Music, I was struck by the astonishing correlations between the phenomena attributed to the ghost and the mysterious, fantastic tragedy that occurred at the same time. I was soon led to the idea that the tragedy could perhaps be rationally explained by the phenomena. The events in question go back only 30 years, and at the dancers' lounge at the opera, it would still not be hard to find respectable old people of unquestionable honesty who remember, as if it were only yesterday, the mysterious and tragic circumstances surrounding the abduction of Christine Daae, the disappearance of Vicomte Raoul de Chagny, and the death of his older brother, Count Philippe, whose body was found on the shore of the lake that lies beneath the opera, in the direction of the Rue Scribe. But none of those witnesses ever thought that the more or less legendary opera ghost was involved in that terrible calamity. I was slow to realize the truth because my mind was troubled by the investigation that kept coming up against seemingly unearthly events. More than once, I was on the verge of giving up an endeavor in which I exhausted myself pursuing a vain image without ever grasping it. Finally, I had proof that my intuition had not deceived me, and all my efforts were rewarded on the day when I became certain that the opera ghost had been more than an aberration. On that day, I had spent long hours poring over Memoirs of a Manager, a lightweight book by the overly skeptical Amal Mashaman, who, during his time at the opera, understood nothing about the ghost's bewildering actions. He was vigorously making fun of them at the very time when he became the first victim of the curious financial operation that took place inside the magic envelope. Feeling disheartened, I had just left the library when I met the charming administrator of our National Academy. He was on the landing, talking with a lively, elegantly dressed little man, to whom he cheerfully introduced me. The administrator was aware of my research, and knew how impatiently I had tried, in vain, to discover the whereabouts of Monsieur Frere, the examining magistrate in the famous Chagny case. No one had known what had become of him, or even if he was dead or alive. Now, he was just back from Canada, where he had spent 15 years, and the first thing he had done in Paris was come to the Secretariat of the Opera to get a complimentary ticket. That little old man was Monsieur Frere himself. We spent a good part of the evening together, and he told me about the Chagny case, as he had understood it. He had to conclude, for lack of evidence, that the Vicomte was insane, and his older brother's death was accidental, but he remained convinced that a terrible tragedy had taken place between the two brothers with regard to Christine Daae. He was unable to tell me what had become of her or the Vicomte, and of course, he only laughed when I mentioned the ghost. He too had been told about the singular happenings, which seemed to indicate that some sort of supernatural being had taken up residence in one of the most obscure parts of the opera, He knew the story of the magic envelope. But in all this, he felt there was nothing that required the attention of the magistrate investigating the Shanij case. All he had done about it was to listen for a few moments to the testimony of a witness who had come forward of his own accord to say that he had met the ghost. This witness was none other than the man called the Persian in fashionable Paris society. He was well known to all of the opera's subscribers. The magistrate decided he was a lunatic. As you can well imagine, I was prodigiously interested in what Monsieur Ferret said about the Persian. I wanted to find that precious original witness, if it was not yet too late. My good luck prevailed, and I discovered him in the little apartment on the Rue Rivoli, where he still lived, and where he died 5 months after my visit. At first I was skeptical, but I could no longer have any doubts, when the Persian told me, with childlike candor, everything he personally knew about the ghost. And when he gave me full possessions of proofs of its existence, as well as Christine Daae's strange correspondence, which cast a glaringly bright light on his appalling destiny. No, the ghost was not a myth. I was told, of course, that some of the correspondence might not be genuine, and that all of it might have been fabricated by a man whose imagination had surely been nourished by enchanting tales. But fortunately, I was able to find samples of Christine's handwriting outside of the famous packet of letters. I then made a comparative study that removed all uncertainty. I also found out as much as I could about the Persian, and concluded that he was an honest man, incapable of contriving a machination that might mislead justice. And this was also the opinion of the family friends, all prominent people who were directly or indirectly involved in the Chani affair. I showed them all my documents and explained all my deductions to them. They gave me generous encouragement in this connection. I will take the liberty of quoting what General D wrote to me. Dear Sir, I cannot urge you too strongly to make public the results of your investigation. I clearly remember that several weeks before the disappearance of the great singer Christine Daae and the tragedy that saddened everyone in Faubourg Saint-Germain, there was a great deal of talk in the dancers' lounge about the ghost, and I believe that the talk continued until everyone's mind became occupied with the tragedy I have mentioned. But if it is possible, as I believe it is, after having heard you to explain the tragedy by means of the ghost, I hope you will tell us more about the ghost. However mysterious he may seem at first, he will always be more explainable than that dark affair in which spiteful people tried to create deadly enmity between two brothers who had loved each other all their lives. I remain, etc. Finally, with my evidence in hand, I went all over the ghost's vast domain, the majestic building that he had turned into his empire, and the Persian's documents were corroborated by everything my eyes saw and my mind perceived. Then a marvelous discovery decisively completed my work. It will be recalled that recently, when workmen were digging in the basement of the opera to bury phonographic recordings of singers' voices, they uncovered a skeleton. As soon as I saw it, I had proof that it was the skeleton of the opera ghost. I had the administrator of the opera touch that proof with his own hand, and now it does not matter to me that the newspapers say the skeleton belonged to the victim of the Commune. The poor people who were slaughtered in the cellars of the opera at the time of the Commune were not buried on that side. I will later tell where the skeleton can be found, far away from the immense crypt where all sorts of provisions were stored during the siege. I came upon them when I was searching for the remains of the opera ghost, which I would not have found if it had not been for the highly unlikely circumstance of the living voices being buried. But I will come back to that skeleton, and the question of what should be done with it. I must now end this very necessary forward by thanking those who modestly played secondary roles in this drama, but were a great help to me, such as Police Commissioner Mifroy, who made the preliminary investigation after Christine Daae's disappearance, Monsieur Rimet, for the former secretary, Monsieur Mercier, the former administrator, Monsieur Gabriel, the former chorus master, and particularly Baroness de Castellet Babozek, who was once Little Meg. It is not ashamed of it, the brightest star in our admirable corps de ballet, and the oldest daughter to the Honourable Madame Giry, now deceased, who was the usher of the ghost's box. Because of them, the reader and I will now be able to relive those hours of terror and pure love and all their details.